Adventurous audio. From idea to ear.
Because I've seen suicide so persistent in my family, it's felt like that's what I would have to do, or the only way that I would die. I thought that that's what I was going to do or had to do to an extent, and I know that sounds really odd, but it just felt like it's what's happened and what would naturally happen because of the generational trauma that's been assigned to me or I've inherited.
How does losing a parent to suicide when you're young go on to impact the rest of your life? How does it shape you as you become an adult? And what's the legacy of losing a parent to suicide? Saski Smith's dad took his own life when she was just 12. It's only now, at the age of 36, she's becoming able to talk about it. Just before we get underway with talking about it, a reminder, these conversations are often difficult and can be upsetting. If you need support, please do press pause and get some help. You'll find all the contact details for Mikey's Line, who we make this series with, in the show notes. I'm Penny Stewart, and this is Speaking of Suicide, and I'm talking to Saski Smith. Saski, how does it feel to have found your voice? Is that how it feels? Does it feel like you found a voice after all these years?
Yes, absolutely. It feels really freeing in that I am finally at a stage where I can look to talk about this topic, my dad, say the word dad even, without, I suppose, crying buckets. So it feels quite empowering and liberating and certainly freeing that I am in this position now, which is great.
Talking about it, I suppose being able to say the word dad, I mean, that even just saying that is I mean, it gives us a really good indication of how difficult it has been. But you've gone from not just being able to talk about it, but seemingly actively wanting to talk about it because you approached us and wanted to take part in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that being quite open, publicly open about it, feel important to you?
I think there are a couple of angles on this. One is absolutely personally. I want to look to overcome this conversation from a personal point of view. I want to really look to evolve my own skills on communicating publicly and evolving my skills in being honest and open with this. But most importantly, I want other people to be able to hear a story which they may well connect with and not feel alone with it. I suppose one of the biggest reasons I've looked to speak openly about this is from last year. I had quite a pivotal moment. I was lucky enough to be enrolled on some training. It's a program called Live and Leader, and essentially the ethos of that whole program is to be yourself, be your authentic self, and you're really encouraged to share your story. So it was challenging initially anyway, because it was a lot of learning and I would never have classed myself as an academic. So I was very harsh on myself at the start of it. But throughout the training process, I had a trainer called Tasha Bridgen actually, and she was just incredible with me. And one of the modules is to really share your story. You're encouraged to share as much or as little as you'd like. And I kind of just thought, I've got nothing to lose, let's just go for it. So I shared my detailed story in probably more of a granular way than I'd ever done so. So it was very liberating, but I was very apologetic about it. And a few days after doing that, Tasha quite publicly in front of the other trainers approached me and said, "You seem to apologise an awful lot for yourself, and you don't have to." And it was perhaps, really simple language, but for me, it was huge. It was such a pivotal moment in somebody so quickly understanding me and the challenges that I may have faced, and being it was okay because she was saying it's your story, you don't have to apologise for that, and no one had ever said that to me. So it felt really freeing and liberating for me to be able to just be comfortable in sharing. And I suppose since then, I felt a bit of a desire to look to carry that through from myself.
Is there something too, Saski, in hearing your own story through your words, in actually vocalizing it, in it's almost like a mirror to yourself, and actually hearing yourself put it out there, so you can feel, I was going to say, I don't want to say feel sorry for yourself, but you can sympathise and empathise with what you've been through. I wonder whether there's something in that process of us telling our stories, actually putting it out there and hearing ourselves say it, that's quite powerful.
Absolutely. It is a form of therapy, I suppose, isn't it? And, ironically, my mantra, my tagline, my statement of life has always been, it's safer to share. I would always encourage my friends, colleagues, partners to carry that through life. And I would always want to create a space for people to allow them to share. And like I say, the irony of it is that I haven't often shared myself, especially to the detail that I want to, because it has been very painful. It has been incredibly challenging. So to get to a stage where I can speak openly about that is incredible and like you say, very powerful, and not something I ever thought I would be able to do. So it's really positive.
It's amazing, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you on. Speaking of suicide, I do want to come to talk about how you managed to get to the point where you've got to, because it's clearly been quite a trajectory. But before we do that, let's scroll back a bit. What, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah,
what do you remember of losing your dad? What are you able to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 12 when he passed. So to give a bit of context, my dad he'd always suffered with mental illness from all I can remember. My mum and him separated when I was a baby, so he was quite an ambivalent character. So he was always in and out of my life, from being a baby up to 10 years old. My dad had an incredibly troubled childhood. He had real challenges with his parents. His mother was incredibly abusive in every way you could imagine, and it resulted in her taking her own life at 38. So he had an awful lot to deal with, and it really projected, I suppose, in every factor of him. You could see it from day to day. He was quite chaotic most of the time. He was, like I say, in and out of our lives. You couldn't really rely on him. He would drink a lot. He would be in trouble with the police. So he'd had a hard time of it, and unfortunately, it came to the stage where my dad began to mirror the behaviours of his parents. So we were put in a position where we had to stop seeing him from, a legal point of view, I suppose. So when I say we, I have two older sisters, so we stopped seeing him when I was 10. I'm the youngest. And so there was this interim period of around 2 years, which was really difficult in trying to navigate and understand where he'd gone. Because I was so young and so many things had happened, I hadn't really understood, and it was hard for my mum and sisters to explain to me, the nature of the events that had happened. I just didn't understand it. So it was really challenging. And then one day, I remember it really vividly in that the police came to our door, and my mum came in a while later to the front room where me and my sisters were, and she'd, looked visibly distressed. And I just remember her standing against this radiator with her hands on it, just gripping it really tight and just saying, "Girls, you need to be really brave. Your dad's died." And the only way I can look to explain it is in that very moment, it was as if somebody pressed pause on my life, and that it's been a struggle ever since to press play. I don't remember at the time if my mum explained that it was suicide. I can't remember that. I remember following conversations about his death, and then I remember learning how he did it later on, and later coming years. But really, it was just unbelievable. Even without his presence, we hadn't seen him for a long time, or if we had, it had been really sporadic, and it was toxic to a point. So it didn't feel real. That's the only way I can look to describe it. It was so unbelievably odd. I know that's maybe a funny word to describe it, but it was such an odd movement to get through.
How much, if any, support do you remember getting in the aftermath of your dad's death?
Zero. It was, looking back now, it's unbelievable the lack of support that we had. So I think from our family's point of view, we had a day off school, so we were told Dad had died. I imagine, from what I remember, I imagine they would have told us how. And then we went back to school the next day, and I remember the week after was his funeral, and I remember having to say to my friends, "Oh, I'm off to a funeral next week," and they were like, "Whose is it?" And I was like, "It's my dad's." And the response that I got was really interesting and really shocking, and I remember starting to feel the shame attached to it at that point because of the visible shock that I got from people. And then following that, there was no support. In answer, it's a really quick answer. There wasn't any, not from school, not from the social services, because of, the history attached to him. There wasn't anything for years and years. In my adult years, I've paid for therapy in order to try and look to unravel and resolve some of this.
Why do you think there wasn't any support? Was there any sense that people had devalued somehow your relationship with your dad because you hadn't seen him for 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point as well, which kind of goes into other avenues as well. But I think, yes, there was some disconnection from a perspective point of view, in that people were like, he's not been in their lives. But mostly, and this has been a real struggle for me to overcome in my adult years, is because he had such a challenging life and made some really, really bad choices. The language used around him and the people's views of, oh, well, it was probably for the best because he might have hurt you. He was going down the wrong path. So it's been really interesting to hold any conversations that I've had about it, because I've been so terrified of the response that I was to receive when explaining, some of his past and some of the choices that he's made. So it's been really hard.
You said that you were aware of a response from your friends when you said you were going to your dad's funeral. So it sounds like right from the get-go you sensed some kind of stigma? Did you sense a
Yeah.
stigma?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think I would have told anybody at that age why and how it had happened. But I actually think when I was asked in school about what funeral I was going to, I think that was one of the last times that I'd said dad up until quite recently. Because I remember feeling in that moment it was so uncomfortable to say it because there was such a negative, moment attached to it that I just then couldn't say the word dad for so many years.
Was the word dad used by anyone in your family?
Not really. It was taboo because of the history of my dad. It was such a difficult topic for us all to speak about, and we didn't reference him in a positive light, really, and especially with suicide on top of all of it. It was really, really difficult to look to approach a conversation on that. I think me and my older sister only spoke about him or this, what had happened years later, like early 20s. It was just a very lonely place.
And did you have photos of him or keep any mementos of him?
No,
No.
I later asked for some photos from my mum. She had some pieces of him, and we had them but privately, so they weren't ever displayed anywhere. So I've kind of always had that one photo that I take around with me.
And apart from that that locking down of the word dad and
Yeah.
in a sense this silence around what had happened,
Mm.
what were the other consequences of all this? What impact did it have on you as a person as you grew up into adulthood?
Yeah, I think huge impacts from me. I think going into my late teens especially is when I first actually spoke about it to somebody, and it felt like I was just desperately trying to get words out of my mouth, and I could not say what had happened. I'd had a bit of a breakdown at work in trying to navigate this because it had all come to its head because I'd kept it in for so long. So I think it's felt really lonely for most of my life in managing this and navigating through it. It's impacted relationships especially because I have always tried to look to fill the void of a male figure missing in my life. I suppose I have been guilty of staying in some relationships too long where I should have recognised there were poor behaviours, and running away from the ones where they seem to be healthy because the cycle of the toxic behaviours weren't there. So hugely impacted my relationship front. And even from a friendship point of view, I'm incredibly blessed to have a great group of friends now, but for so long I felt different, and it was really hard to form friendships from that because I felt like I was always hiding something, and I suppose I was. So it was always really difficult to be my authentic self in being the real me and feeling like I had to share this or I had to justify it.
To what extent did it also put a pressure on you, Saski, in terms of your emotional life, for want of a better description? Were you said you'd had a bit of a breakdown at one point. Did you allow yourself to get depressed, to be unhappy? How did it impact how you felt able to express when life was tough?
Yeah. I don't think I don't think I've learned or have yet got to a healthy stage in how to express this, if I'm honest. And I think probably this part of this is helping me do so. I would often get to a bit of a burnout stage where I would become incredibly depressed and incredibly low and dark and cry an awful lot through that. But again, like I say, mostly alone, so that it wasn't for viewing of others, so someone could put a hand in and reach out to you. So I think it kind of shines through in ways of depressive moments and really pulling away from friends and family is what I tend to do when I'm having a difficulty with it all.
Do you think there's in any way a pressure um, from friends and family? Obviously, no one wants history to repeat.
Mm.
And so I wonder whether such a difficult history comes with this sort of loaded pressure not to have history repeat, not to be part of that repetition. Don't be
Yeah.
sad because, oh, where might that end up?
Yeah.
Is there a pressure in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. I think I've only last year, through some therapy, I learned more about generational trauma and hadn't realised the huge impact that had had on me. Essentially, I understand it to be because my dad took his own life, his mum took her own life, both at the age of 38. I'm 36, on the approach to 38, and it feels incredibly overwhelming in order to get there. The pressure of my generation now, my dad's kids, in order to break the chain has weighed very heavy on me, and especially I think in moments where I've perhaps been depressed or been incredibly sad, you so recognise and empathise in how somebody in that position must have felt. So there is a real conflict with it in you really understand how they feel, and it just feels like it makes it 10 times worse because you're not allowed to get to that stage because you can't do that. And I think, interestingly, through understanding more about generational trauma, I've always understood it to be my exit. And I know that sounds horrible and I don't want it to be my exit.
You
But I
mean you
suppose
mean taking your own life would be your
yes.
exit?
Yeah. I suppose the only way I can look to explain this is somebody, let's say, where they have a family of cancer, breast cancer, maybe there is a grandma, a mother and a daughter. They would often take preventative avenues in order to explore if they're going to be hit with this deadly disease. And maybe they live with some fear in that is going to impact them. That's the only kind of alignment I can look to explain it in, that because I've seen suicide so persistent in my family, it's felt like that's what I would have to do, or the only way that I would die. And I hadn't realised that until, like I say, from last year doing some therapy, and it really scared me. It was a horrible realisation that I thought that that's what I was going to do or had to do to an extent. And I know that sounds really odd, but it just felt like it's what's happened and what would naturally happen because of the generational trauma that's been assigned to me or I've inherited.
Was it the realization that you felt that way that was the scary part of this? Because from the way you're speaking, it almost sounds like you don't fear the idea of suicide.
It was scary to have that realization, and I think that's been there for such a long time and I really hadn't realized. I think I've always been really terrified of death. I remember from a really young age that I was terrified that I was going to die. I used to sit with my mum crying from the age of 5, begging her not to die or for somebody to die. And then I think with that belief, then my dad passing, it really cemented the belief that key people are going to die. So I've always been really fearful of death. I don't want to leave. I don't want to exit at all, and I certainly don't want it to be by suicide. But it's always been an underlying thought as to that's how I would die. And again, the realization of that is just to say that out loud is horrible. It makes me feel horrible, and it makes I don't want people to hear that, because it's not a nice thing to say, but it's been my reality for so long.
Do your sisters share these kind of thoughts?
I think my middle sister would, yes. I've 2 older sisters, of which is around 18 months between each of us, and my middle sister probably would feel a similar way, whereas my eldest sister is slightly more detached and wouldn't think that. I don't believe.
Have you, to what extent have you articulated this, as you just have done to me and all of us listening to you? Have you articulated this more widely? And if so, what's been people's response to that? Because it's actually quite a shocking thing to hear.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever said that out loud, other than when discovered with my therapist last year, and where we looked to explore it. But I've never said that to any other person.
Well, I think it's really important we come on to talk about how you, I don't know if recovered is quite the right word, but how you moved on from some of this. We'll come on to talk about that in just a second. If you are listening to this and Saski's story is striking a chord and you need someone to talk to, then you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55, or contact them via Messenger, web chat and WhatsApp. The number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. Or if you're in the Highlands, you can go and visit them at the Hive, 4 Strothers Lane, Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6 till 10 p.m. And all those details and links are, of course, in the show notes. Saski, where have you got to now in terms of how you feel about your dad's suicide?
I think I feel huge empathy still. I have always felt incredibly empathetic towards him, which has really been to my detriment sometimes. And I say that because I suppose I link that to, the relationships that I've had, because of the empathy that you attach to somebody going through that, and particularly the behaviours shown prior to. I'd really put my dad on a pedestal, and I absolutely forgive him, and I understand hugely and very clearly as to why he took that path. But like I say, I think it's been really difficult to navigate, because I in my adult years allowed really poor behaviours from people in the fear that if I walk away from any relationship, friendship or spouse, that they will then take their own life.
That sounds like you blamed yourself.
Yeah. And again, only a recent discovery, because I really didn't think that I did, because I had such huge empathy for him. I thought I understood it. But there must have been something in me, a child of 12, to hear that the male who was meant to be a protector chose to walk away and not protect you. So I absolutely understand it to have impacted me in a way of, not feeling enough, and that certainly links with relationships in my adult years, and just the fear of a man especially looking to hurt themselves because of an involvement with me is catastrophic to me.
How early on do you think you developed that empathy for what he'd done?
I think probably immediately. I think I'd always had empathy for my dad because we'd seen him really struggle, and even before he took his own life, he would struggle. He was, lived in a really difficult situation. I'd always want to help him from a really young age. I'd always think we would go back to him. I remember my middle sister, when we stopped seeing him, she would say to me, when I'm 16, we'll go see Dad and we'll take him some pasta and sauce, and I can cook that because I know how to do that. So I remember in those 2 years of stopping seeing him, having like a really fantasised hope that we would be the rescuers. And I suppose that is ultimately I wasn't able to do that. So I took huge responsibility from that. And that's been devastating in not being able to play a part in looking to fix somebody, I suppose, or save them. And I've certainly carried that as a characteristic through to my adult years.
I wonder if we can sometimes fail to realise just how even quite young children can have so much capacity for loving and caring and empathy and nurturing. We can forget that, or we can we can forget it. But you've just demonstrated that beautifully. How did you reach a turning point for this? If you feel you have reached a turning point, I appreciate it's a process. But what have been the key things that have allowed you to do some of this really difficult thinking and sharing?
Yeah, I think honestly, I became exhausted with thinking negatively about it, in the shape and form of myself thinking negatively, like perhaps it was my fault, I took responsibility, I didn't save him. I became exhausted. I'm 36 now, and this happened over 20 years ago. So it's such a long time to feel lonely, to feel exhausted, to feel not good enough and not worthy of having positive and happy relationships for myself and with others. And I just came to a point where I thought, I have to do something. This is just consuming me. And I'd read posts or on social media all about how your past shouldn't define you, and it really rung true to me because my past so did. It would leak into every avenue of my life, and I just got sick of it. I was just like, I wouldn't say there was anything huge in something happened to me in order to look to be more comfortable with that. Like I say, I've had therapy for the last 10 years, on and off. There hasn't been a moment as such where I've had that light bulb moment and thought, this has really helped me, or this is going to get me through. But I've been persistent in trying to explore avenues in order to help my mind settle and ease some of the guilt and the shame that's been assigned to this. And really, I forced myself through it. And I think just really persevering in thinking, some light will come from this darkness. And with the drive in wanting to help others, I started to think, how can I look to pull the beauty out of this beast, let's say, and support other people with that? Because I started to think, nobody should feel this lonely for so long. And, you know, at the age of 36, I've never met another person who has lost someone to suicide, let alone a parent. I've never been told about support groups. Only again recently through researching I've found avenues that are available. So they're driving me to want to create more awareness on that and encourage people to use their voice. And like I say, my mantra of it's safer to share, I just feel an urge to get it out there, because I've struggled for so long, and I can't. There must be other people like me. There must be other people with this secret and this shame, and it's such a horrible, lonely feeling that, aligned with my hypo-empathy, it's a real conflict in that I want to do it for myself, but I so desperately want to help anyone else and just give them the freedom and say it's okay to share, it's safer to share. And I really hope that I can do that.
Saski, there's a trend going on just now. I don't tend to follow social media trends, but this one has snagged me a touch. And it's this business of women writing about meeting their younger self for a coffee.
Yes, yeah.
And what you would say to your younger self. And as I was thinking about talking to you today, I couldn't help wondering about putting you in that position and what you would say to 12-year-old Saski.
This makes me probably more emotional than other parts of this conversation, because I feel detached in a way, in that it doesn't feel like me. So when I think about this story and talk about what's happened, I see it as if I'm looking at somebody, and it breaks my heart. So I will just simply hug her and wrap my arms around her and offer the support that she so needed, and just provide clarity and understanding and open conversation, and just pull her away from the darkness of it. Let her see it's not her fault, and not to carry the burden so much of it.
Saski, you have been amazing in
Thank
sharing
you.
this. Mm-hmm. Truly amazing. And so open and honest. And I have no doubt that you're... I'm getting upset too now. But I have no doubt this honesty and sharing will find its mark. There will be other Saskis out there,
yeah,
who need to hear this. And you know, if I could reach through the computer and give you a massive hug, you and young Saski, it's there. Thank you so much.
You.
Honestly, thank you so much, Saski.
Thank you for listening.
It's my privilege. I was talking to Saski Smith. Now, here's Shona from Mikey's Line with a few thoughts to take away from our conversation today.
So helpful to hear Saski talk about something that I believe isn't talked about very much, the generational cycle of suicidal behaviour, and also her insight and courage to break this cycle. Generational trauma is real. There's a lot of evidence, research showing that through our epigenetics, trauma can be passed on from generation to generation. Studies with for example, Holocaust survivors, show that people's brain chemistry has been affected generations down the line. And in addition to the biological things passed on, so to the psychology that can be passed down our family lines, such as the secrecy around what might have happened to our grandparents or our parents, and how that in that silence shame can be bred, and how we can take on these unhelpful and burdening beliefs as children that then shape us. Saski shares so powerfully how these factors created for her a belief that she wasn't even conscious of initially, but knew, kind of felt, that it was inevitable that she would die by suicide. And then that became more conscious as she worked on herself. And she realised that she didn't want this for herself, and worked very hard through therapy, through gaining self-understanding, to let go of this burdensome belief. Listening to her, it's really clear that she's worked hard to understand the loneliness and pain that didn't make sense to her initially, to find healing. She met her younger self with love and compassion, and this changed everything for her. So if you're listening to this and this strikes a chord, maybe you've lost an ancestor or relative to suicide and can relate to Saski's story, or you know somebody that's in this situation, I hope you can feel the hope that came through from her story, that family legacy burdens don't need to be carried anymore. And it's much easier to let go of these burdens with support. So please seek out this right support for you.
Thank you, Shona. Huge thanks to not just Shona, but the whole team at Mikey's Line for the work that they do. Don't forget, if you need someone to talk to or some help, then you can text Mikey's Line on 07786 20 77 55, or you can contact them via Messenger, web chat or WhatsApp. The number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. And if you're in the Highlands, you can of course go and visit Micah's Line at The Hive, 4 Strothers Lane, Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m, and all those details and links are in the show notes. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you'd like to share your story. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.